getting a dirty look from the dog because he thinks I should be taking him out on. I will take him out on an ace walk in a minute. Anyway, hello. Today I want to start looking at, well, see how far we get. I want to begin by looking at circular isometric movement and talk about some of the concepts we've been talking about creating more volume within a smaller space and how this functions within each one. I've looked a lot of stuff of that theoretically and thinking about phased movement and why we're doing this, and also muscular engagement in movement and how muscles work together. So I got a really good question from someone who very kindly watches the videos and makes some really helpful comments sometimes that really help me, asking about muscular strength. So thinking more about not so much the strength of muscles and individual muscles themselves, which is a thing like Yao Zhongzhong talks about Zhang changing muscles themselves, and I think that must happen to some degree because the feeling for holding postures in longer periods is very intense. So, and you can feel like you've done a weight session almost after a longer period of, particularly if you're utilizing what we call like internal forces, but we don't mean something magical by that. Maybe the dog, I don't know. He looks beautiful, but he's got like 6 asbos or something like. Yeah, so whatever it might do with muscles, we shouldn't think about it like that. Think about it in terms of strength, like an alternative to weight training or something like that. You know, when we're using this kind of Yiquan training method, the most important thing is how are the muscles working together as a total system, and how do we increase that ability to work together as a total system? And that's not a difficult concept to get across, is it? It's like, it's the same in anything. It's the same in a business. If you've got a team of people who are working and they're not working well together, and you get them working well together, then you increase the productivity, the ability of the business or group or whatever it is to function. And it's just exactly the same with our muscles, and that's the idea we want to get across. So the next thing then to think about is, what are we actually doing? So I want to not be too theoretical and think a lot. I wouldn't put your nose near my boiling hot Chinese tea, thank you very much. Starting with this posture that we have looked at before, but I said I'd come back to it. So the arms are going to circle this way. The arms are going to circle around like that, a bit like what's called the cabbage patch in hip hop dancing. And the body's going to circle alternately like that. Remember, I talked about the idea that this appears to break our rule of we don't go opposite like that, or we phase the move, but we don't usually do it phased completely like that. It's phased so that the movement of the body in this kind of posture waves forward like that. And remember, I talked about the idea that, well, this is creating more volume in the movement, and that's been the theme that we've been looking at for a few videos now. Creating more volume out of a smaller space, and that's one of the things that a wave does. There's all this movement, and it's not just that movement, it's all of this behind for the same length of movement. And when we do this, it seems to break the rule because we're going opposite to the part of the body is going opposite to the other. I'm pushing myself away from the body like that, which seems like it's doing that, but that's not the rule. The rule is, how is it rooted and how would you brace it? So it's braced it changes from the front to the back like that, and we're pushing forwards and back. So I'm pushing back like that, and this is our first exercise. We keep it stacked quite high first, like just get the feeling, and quite a small circle about. Unless if you're just doing that with a basketball or something like that on the table or something. And what we need to do is feel the push from the front and the back leg like that. And we know these are absolutely bog standard Yiquan exercises, and the point next is like, how do we interpret these? What's going on with these postures? So we need to be able to explain, for example, when we're doing this, we're visualizing, let's say pulling someone that way, and we are changing, and then feeling the different ways that the posture roots. That this is real, that when I push this way, I'm bracing that way, pulling someone that way, and I'm maximising the ability to use force with my body. I'm not pretending that I've got some kind of magic power or that I produce electricity or something like that, and people will just fly back, and it's not all theory with no reality. And so when we see older Yiquan masters doing things like, this kind of posture, well, why are they doing that? Why would you bother doing that? And is there an alternative explanation which completely makes sense? And yes, there is. Not just can we start thinking about, well, this is how you're bracing against the root to move people like that. But why are we moving like this anyway? Why are we moving in a phased movement? And this kind of spiral movement anyway, like that. It's not just to move someone. It's because when we use phased movement, if I really exaggerate it, Gao Chen style, when we use phased movement, we're bringing higher level of volume into a smaller space. We're making the movement bigger, and a bigger movement combined with Farley helps us to get more power. So again, one of the things to recognise with people who've gone on the wrong path, when I was talking about the psychological reasons why they do that, but it doesn't really matter, does it? They've gone on the wrong path, and they start talking about Farley as a simple single thing, which we can say, oh yeah, mass times speed, but in an explosive way. It's simple in that sense, but that simple thing, like all true elements of the Tao, then open up into a myriad different possibilities and ways of doing things. So there's not just one way of doing Farley, and it isn't just one thing, and it can be bigger or smaller. We've looked at, it can be articulated movement, it can be round an axis, it can be forward this way, rotational this way. There's all different kinds. It can be kinked. There's all different kinds and sizes and ways and levels of doing it. And it's got all different physiological things that link into it. It's a complex science in and of itself. We were always told this. Wang Xingjai made this explicitly clear. So once we can start explaining things like this and showing how phased movement like this, why is that there? What is it for? It's creating, when you use a phase and a spiral like that, you're creating more volume in the movement so you can create more power. So, right, now it all starts falling into place. So stored forces, like, there's different parts of the body you can generate power, but you've got to search and find for that. But we're not talking about like stores of chi or electricity or anything like that. We're talking about physiological movement, like the stored power in a spring or something, that when we move like, if I put more phase on it, and this is what Gao Chen does. It's a really good example of like thinking like the more articulation I can get on a posture, the more I can get power into the movement. And I said before, that's like, particularly with Yao Zhongzhong, starts reining that back in, but you see some branches of each one, as we've looked at anyway in the past few videos, where this very big movement where you're just trying to get more volume into the movement. You might hide it in the footwork, you might hide it in articulation, you might hide it in spiral movement, articulated movement, but it's all just getting more volume into the movement to create more power. Once we start seeing it like that, and then when we start adding Farley into it, as I'm going to do today and demonstrate today, then there's no question that this is the real thing. We've got to leave those people behind who can't come along with this. That's all dead. 100 years from now, no one cares about that magic power stuff. It's got no future at all. It's just a temporary pyramid scheme to rip people off their gas money. That's all it is. And that can be hard to get past. One of the things it then does is, as we've talked about before, it starts making us appoint expectations about things that aren't true, because it's bodily knowledge. Until our body knows it, our mind's going to try and interpret the concept. So this is why I've talked about each one being gamified. So I've started now to talk about this idea in the past few videos of tension, bringing tension into the body, so that not just so that, but one of the things it does is it allows the intent to feel the body. So bringing intent into the body so that it can feel the whole body like that. And that leads on to, as I've said before, different ways of thinking about what whole body interconnectivity is. And there's lots of different ways that happens in Chinese Wushu that all in some way revolve around tension. And I've said tension's not the right word. We can say muscular engagement, because muscular engagement can be on a ratio, it can be on a, it can be degrees rather than just tense like that, which is what you're doing in, Southern Shaolin Chuan as a training exercise like extreme tension. It doesn't have to be like that. But it does the same thing in terms of thinking like whole body power. People will call that whole body power because you can feel the tension. And there's other ways as well. So, similarly in White Crane. But also something like a good example is something like Mantis, where it's a different kind of whole body. And that's a really good example, like the movement like that. It uses this kind of nodding dog posture, and that also can feel like it is also a form of whole body interconnectivity. So if we want to start looking at differences actually between something like Mantis and something like Bagua and Xing Yiquan and Tai Chi, and find real identifiable differences, well, the key one is how we use, no, not fascia, that's just something, fascia's not made up, but the whole idea of fascia in so-called internal martial arts is just nonsense. It's not about that, it's about articulation and how you articulate movement. So there's a difference between like this kind of whole body movement, and there's a difference between this very articulated movement, which you don't have so much in Xing Yiquan, I have to say, but particularly Bagua, Tai Chi, and Liu He Ba. You have this kind of very articulated movement, creating more volume within a shorter space. Every martial art does that in different ways. Even if you're just doing Mantis, even just like doing something like that is creating space to get more power on the movement, a Mantis Warrior. But this is a different paradigm where we start using articulated movement to create volume. And the next thing we can learn from that Mantis example is just kind of a little bit of a recap before we go on, is that when we say whole body power in each one, we don't mean this kind of thing where the body's kind of, to do that I just lock my body and then just rock back and forwards on my root. So just to bring a little bit of muscular, and obviously you usually do a little bit of muscular tension into the body. And that's exactly the same thing that people do when they don't understand each one, but they think they do, that they think they understand whole body connectivity in each one. So point being that whole body interconnectivity can mean multiple different things in Chinese Wushu, and it can be right in one branch of Wushu and wrong in another branch of Wushu. Dynamic tension is whole body interconnectivity. This kind of Mantis movement is whole body interconnectivity. But let's say you bring this Mantis movement, the idea is a little bit more like the body's moving as one, but not in a phased way. And that's what people do when they think in each one, like you just go like that, like a robot, like that. That's the same. You might as well go like that, like Mantis. You might as well go like that. Robotic movement. This kind of movement. I'm thinking that's whole body interconnectivity because of the robotic way that it's linking together like that, which I've criticised before. And then thinking very differently, well actually no, that's not it. What they're opposed to in that kind of movement is the way that it should be done, which is phased movement. And the difference between, for example, if I'm gonna punch like that, I'm not gonna do that. I'm going to use phase movement in different ways, like, and what that kind of thing does is it makes you think like the whole body's got to move together like that, and you see that all the time, whole body weight concepts being confused with whole body power concepts. So I want to move like a robot with all my body weight, very stiff movement, all my body weight like that. And we want to oppose that with the real way of doing it in each one, which is phased movement, which different parts of the body are moving. And getting this articulation into the movement. We've talked a lot about that. So our first exercise is exactly this, it's articulated movement. Keeping it stacked quite high first. And if you're slipping on the floor, you're going to get lower and lower. But then, you know, based on what we've done before, we can start skewing the stack, the way it stacks, to get even lower. I don't mean my legs are slipping, so I'm getting lower, but I mean lower either side, like skew the stack, like. Show the way we're doing it. Side to side. And then we can get even more articulated movement in the, if we want to really exaggerate it, Gauchen style, and just get every part of the body, every little bit of stored force, all contributing towards the generation of power and this kind of very sensuous feeling of snake-like. And we want it both ways as well, so this way. Again, I talk about it extensively in the intentional movement series, so I don't want to completely rehearse that. I want to move into more using Farley with it. So both ways, one. And then feeling how it changes the other way, like that. And our key learning concept here is, actually there's more stored force. When we start using articulated movement and really exaggerating, and go and look at Gao Chen and how he moves, plenty of video of him on YouTube. Hyper-articulation of movement, and that then, in my view, and I think in Yao Zongzun's view, that kind of posture, which is popular in the earlier Yiquan, contradicts the reality of the fight, the context of the reality of the fight. The movement it starts taking time to get that hyper-articulation into the movement. If we just want to go like that, we don't want to start going, it's taking too much time. The only way we start hiding that, now some other things start making sense, is when we start bringing it into things like push hands. And then we can start using this, and what is this? This is hyper-articulation just brought back into the posture like that. It's just hidden in the exercise of push hands. And I said before, it's negative and positive, because if your opponent's doing something like they're pulling and pushing your arm, then we can use that. You know, someone underhooks you this way and you can change it into an elbow into their body or something like that. You can use that and bring that idea back in and use that as the extra volume of hyper-articulation. It's transferred. Remember we talked about, like, you know, you can do an elbow like this, or you can do it like this and transfer that movement into the movement around the axis. In exactly the same way, you can transfer this kind of hyper-articulation into the movement of push hands, into the setup, so you don't actually see that. If you're just going to do it on the air, you don't see this big hyper-articulation, because you just see it in the push hands like that, or if you're wrestling and changing like that. And that's when we start getting all our characteristic Yiquan guard breaking techniques, where we're changing and moving the arms in different ways and hitting. And the hyper-articulation is shifted into the posture. But do we really want to do it when we're doing our basic training? And my answer is yes and no. So we want to do, because we're training our body holistically, so we want to do sometimes really big hyper-articulation, and then sometimes the tiniest possible. So we can do this, and then we can start changing it into just tiny little circles with the palms, and then feeling the root rocking like that. So this is what I want you to practice. So, and then changing and make the circle bigger. at the same time, it's really teaching us loads about rooting and the way that if you're doing it right, and changing the other way. Again, small and bringing it bigger. And changing one way, like one way, then the other. Should be a song. And how the body moves with it. Keeping it, for now, just keeping it quite a small articulation. Remember this key concept I've talked about, like what's the target? That determines whether the posture is powerful enough or not, or what's the hitting surface, what's the target, or what's the movement, and what's the thing that I'm doing the movement against. If I'm doing a movement against like a whole body, like I've got my hand on someone's neck and I want to move them, like that's going to be a lot harder than if I've just got my hands on their hands and I just do that. That's going to be a lot easier. So it depends what the thing you're doing is. So we just start with the basic light, and then we need to do it with steps. All of this is I've already looked at in the intentional movement series now, so I'm showing a more advanced way. So regardless of how you step, you can start to try and just play with the movement so that it just confuses you, and trains you, discombobulates you, depending on your level. And we start seeing then things like, oh, this is what's going on in back wire, isn't it? It's like hyper-articulation of movements. Hyper-articulation of movements and all this kind of twisting movement to get more volume and power in the posture. Again, I'm not giving all the micro details. Go and look, it's in the intentional movement series. You should be looking at that in harmony with these videos anyway. So, practicing just with steps and different levels of skew to the start, and changing and different heights. And so it's a very unusual kind of routine that we don't normally do, with the just up flat like a pivot root almost, but the foot facing forward like that. Very traditional mushu posture. Which helps you root postures where you have to raise up like this. Changing, and look, spirals all the way. All the way up. And what are we doing? We're trying to train the body to be able to use these concepts infinitely. So we're thinking about what's the minimum amount of things that we need to do to be able to apply it infinitely. And remember, I talked about the idea very early on of like, you punch forward, up, down, this way, this way. If you can do that, you can pretty much do anything in any point within this. You know, there's an infinite variety of things that you can do within that. And that's why we just come up with these exercises like spiraling up, spiraling down like that, and changing as we spiral. And look at what I'm doing with this, using my somatic timing in the somatic bounce. It's actually a little bit more complicated than the kind of somatic bounce that we've been looking at, because it uses both the shoulders very much in the same direction, which is different to doing them opposite. Like, that's quite easy, but to do it like this is quite hard. You've got to really relax your shoulder muscles to try just doing like one way and then changing the other way like that. And feeling the somatic bounce go from side to side with it. And you say, well, why are you doing that? And then like, when you come to do push-ins or you come to do rest like that, and you just want this little, like that, the little movement like that. And think the way we build up to that step by step. So you can practice that on its own, but we'll come to that in a minute. The way we build up to it step by step is this idea I was talking about muscular engagement into the posture. So if you really tense and you really relax, and you tense and relax, you're playing with internal forces. And this is what we mean by internal forces in each one. We don't mean chi or something like that per se. Lots of, as I've said before, lots of each one people do talk about chi, but if it's helpful, it's helpful. Get out of the bin. But it's not really necessary. So muscular engagement and relaxation and playing with those forces just like we do. That's why sometimes when we do standing for longer periods, it's very much like weight training, feels like that, because we're really emphasising the muscular engagement and relaxation, playing with internal forces and contradictions. In exactly the same way here, when I'm doing this, there's all kinds of things going on. So the movement in the hands here, it's using the somatic timing here, but it's also playing with the root, and the root's got to be exactly in line with the movement and the motion around the qua and the overall spiral phase of the movement. It's all got to be in line. And you think, well, how do you get all that? Well, it's just training. How hard can it be? It's just training. If I can get it, anyone can get it. You know, wasn't the most, by any means, the most talented of my culture students. If I can get it, anyone can get it. Just step by step. So, how do we get it? Well, let's say first of all for the basic movement, and then there's two things here. One is easier than the other, but you need both. The easiest one is just to do the fa li itself, and I'm saying it's relatively easier. It's not that easy to get it right because it's not that easy to set the posture with a circular movement like that. And it also falls into this category of which hand am I emphasising. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a small movement like that. I'm going to release force in a small circular movement like that. You hear it set pretty clearly on the back foot. So there's a couple of ways that we practice this, and it's quite a complicated thing. It's a more advanced, let's say, put it that way, because of the way that the articulation is so big and advanced, the spiral articulation. There's multiple different ways of setting the same posture within it, depending on which part of the phase. Like if I'm at the back here and I want to set and I want to release force this way, that's a slightly different. If I'm at this part of the phase and I want to release force this way, see, it's set differently and skewed. The stack is skewed differently. So, and just to be clear, we use these terms stack and configuration. They're very similar words, but they don't mean exactly the same thing. So the configuration is the posture itself, and the stack is the way that the posture is constructed. So that just allows us to say things like, well, you need to stack it differently. It's not quite, if you say you need to configure it differently, that implies like you need a completely different posture, a completely different configuration to solve this problem. But the configuration is the solution to the problem. I want to hit this way, and when we've got different minute variations on that problem, then we can start saying, yeah, but you need to stack it differently. So if I'm going through the phased movement like this, phased spiral movement, and I'm here and I want to release force this way, I hit out this way, and it sets on the back foot like that. As I come round, I use getting the articulated movement into the posture is a harder thing because that's integrating finer grain movement. That's exactly what I mean by cultivation. So we'll just start from, well, imagine we're at this point of the phase of this circular movement. We're at this point of the phase, and I want to hit out this way. I don't want to waste time bringing the articulation all the way back round again to the front to then hit. I just want to hit from here. So it's just articulated force on the chopping out like that, chopping out and up like that as well. Also get screwing force on so these key concepts we've looked at where we fuse articulated movement with screwing force, chops up like that, also strengthens the posture of the wrist because it's on the, if you just bend the wrist in like that, it makes this joint brittle, but if you just twist it, it massively strengthens the wrist joint. So from here, we just push out like that, and watch this, opening, sets on the back foot, which you can usually hear pretty heavy because the back foot is, all the weight's on the back foot. But let's say we're here in the articulated spiral movement, and I want to do the same posture and exactly the same thing. I don't want to restack it back. I don't want to change the point within the dynamic stack. I don't want to move it back here. I just want to go straight from here like this. You could probably hear then this time I set it on the front foot like that, much more than the back foot, although they're both moving in like that. Why? Hips are going like that. Think about it, the first one we did that, from here, that, and this one we're doing that. What's that? Open, close, open, close. This incredibly simple idea that runs through so many wushu manuals. Wushu is just open, close, up and down. As I said before, not forwards and backwards. It's usually forwards and backwards are just open and closing the same way. It's just open and close, up and down. So remember video ago or so, I talked about dynamic, that the way we stack postures is dynamic. So this is very dynamic, and wherever I am on the like that, I can change and hit out, and I just change depending on where I am. And this is like the ability to release force instantly in the moment, choosing the exact configuration and then stacking the configuration in exactly the right way, because a lot of people would just want to do it one way like that, using opening because it's such an easier way of usually generating force. So a lot of people will just always pull it back into, they'll make the phase come all the way back before releasing force out like that, and we don't want that for advanced movement. Comes back more, we're here in the phase, or we're here in the phase and we just use open or closing depending on what you want to do. And we start training that in two ways. One is like skew the stack to start with, and just, actually you can set it either way, so you can set it like all of that. If you set it, you start going back that way, like that, set from the back foot, set from the front foot, start going forward like that. These are like tiny little micro adjustments in the art of releasing force intuitively in any direction. When we hear that idea in each one, we think about it, we're made to think about it so simplistically, and those magic power people and the way they pervert our understanding of this. And then you see this kind of thing, you say, oh my goodness, this is like such a difficult and sophisticated art to get in reality. No wonder they just started faking it, you know, it's so much easier. All you need then is someone to throw themselves backwards. Some people have got their price for that, that's all it is. But we don't usually just want like to separate the arms like that. We also want to think about keeping the hands together. So this is another task specific variation for this kind of movement, that we imagine we've got, say, our hands on something. It's not necessarily like arms. You'll see, like when I'm doing sparring quite a lot, if someone goes under, like ducks like that, I'll very often just guide them round like that, put my hands on the back, release force and guide them round. Usually I just guide round, but if I want to, I can release force so that I guide and push and hopefully make them stumble over and fall over like that. When someone does that under a punch, it's quite easy, particularly to get one hand on and just guide them round, keep them going round, stop them from going, you know, or coming back up with the punch like that. Just get a hand on the back and push like that. So keeping the hands together and releasing force, and we'll do this flatter like this because it's easier like that. Thinking about, first of all, release force that way. See, I'm changing the way that I'm setting the the posture, and that all depends on which point of the phase that I'm in when I do that. It's as simple as that. And you can discombobulate yourself at first because you're thinking like, oh, it's setting on the back foot. No, why did it set on the front foot? Like, well, which one is it? Don't sweat that. Let your intent decide that, because it's making a micro calculation about where you are in the phase of the movement as to where it should be. And you'll feel straight away like it's more powerful when it sets from the back foot. It's another reason why people want to do it that way. Just because you can push so well from the back foot and get all your weight into it, whereas this is just kind of oppositional force from when it sets off the front foot like that. You're just using oppositional force. This gets all your weight into the posture, going that way. So your intent does that. Your intent does that. It decides which point of the phase it's at. So you don't even have to think too much about training that. You can just think like, well, I'll just start from here, and I'll think about, if I was going to do it off the front foot, like how would I release force that way? I mean, you can hear then like both the feet usually set when you bring more power into it, and that's what you want, both the feet to set like the roots of the tooth I've talked about before. But when we're breaking it down, we can find which one is dominant, and then flat, and then. So that's just for pushing that way, thinking about how do I push that way, and then with the movement of the phase, which point of the skew do I go for the posture? You've got to practice that on its own. And then you think, like, well, the other way as well. So there's different ways of setting it from the front, dominant, front or back, and all you've got to do is practice. Quite relaxed at first, like that. And like in your mind, imagine at first like you want all the energy to go that way. We don't quite want it like that because we're imagining that our opponent is in front of us. So we want actually quite a short movement. Let's say we're moving their hands and changing into a punch or something like that. We don't actually need to overemphasize. It's not quite the same. For example, like if I wanted to throw someone, like, you know, got them in like that, and I want the energy to go that way, and I want to put a lot more power and directional force in it. I just want to move it out of the way into the posture like that. So that's all I need. So once you start thinking like that, you don't need to overpower the movement, but for practice, you want to see how much power you can get in a movement going that way. And just practice, and then you just practice spring. Quite relaxed at first. So they're just little. This is exactly the kind of training, for example, you see like, we see Yao Cheng Wang, Yao Cheng Wang doing this kind of, just little micro spiral movements like that. And it is spiral because the whole body is phased in a spiral. What does a spiral do? It adds more power into the movement. Apologies, I'm sucking on a cough switch. I've got an unfortunately serious and worsening condition in my throat. So I need to tell you everything I know about each one now, while I can. The question that arises is this spiral force? And I think, like everything in Wushu can be interpreted in different ways, and it doesn't necessarily matter if someone, like, you know, maybe someone calls screwing force spiral force and calls this something else. I don't think that really matters, but to me this is spiral force. It's a spiral, and some of the things that people talk about, some of the characters I've met on the internet, it's quite sad really. It's not, once it goes beyond that early stages of magical wonder at Wushu being wonderful and trying to explore it, once it gets into the pathology of you can't talk for more than 2 posts, that's what they're called, go on grandpa, can't talk for more than 2 posts on the internet before you're in just such a hateful world of mudslinging, and then there's something wrong. There's something wrong in your training. It should just be completely straightforward. And if people can say that's all bullshit, that's fine. But the people who are like, I met someone who's saying like, there are only 6 people in the world who can truly do Farley, and they're all Taoist masters, and just started like kind of looking up who this person was, and he belongs basically to a cult. And you just think, that's sad. That's sad when it's got to that. This is for everyone. The way is not far from the people. It's not about Taoist masters. The Tao is in everyday life. The way is not far from the people. It's in these profound, simple things that unfold like this. So, for me, this is spiral force, and particularly when you start adding in, like you can just do it like as the lead up into a punch or something like that, using this kind of creation of volume, spiral movement, call that spiral force. It is literally spiral force, and then when we start looking at the kind of things I'm talking about now, like releasing force along with the direction of to the side like that, changing it in line with the phase. This is really sophisticated stuff, using spiral force in different ways. So once we start getting this, then the next thing we can do, we do it side by side. We train it simultaneously, and it's the thing we start looking at first of all, and that's bringing things to the lock point. So just practicing and then going around, and then we just bring it to the lock point at different points like that. We can even just go do it all lock points and then back into the flow. And this is what you'll see all Yaos, particularly the older Yaos, Yiquan people will all do this, will all do this kind of movement, and then lock point. Lock point, that's the point where you would have released force. And it's just a really, really great way of training it without, you don't wear out your body, you don't waste hours doing it wrong, you know. You just build it from basics, from stillness into isometric movement, then lock point. Then you just start building up the power into whichever way it is, and whichever part of the phase it is, and however high it is. And you start thinking about arms on different levels, going different directions. So that's why maybe even arms start changing this way, so they both do different circles. And how you would then do, and then start adding down into the. Then you've just got articulated Farley and Bob's your uncle. That's it. How hard can it be? It's exactly the same procedure. Then, one of the really useful things to do is, maybe it even started like this, the basic push hands exercises, keeping the right kind of consistency, starting with single push hands exercise, keeps the right kind of consistency with some pressure. If you haven't got someone to do that with, you can use like I've shown before, like a big Pilates ball, put it on the wall, just give you some pressure back. So, all our different variations, hands on different, changing or keeping them on different heights, like this, and then still trying to just think about how would I release force in one direction, 2 directions. See what I'm doing with the stepping now, and it's exactly the thing that I've been talking about, like you shift part of the volume, shift part of making the posture bigger into the step, you shift the articulated build up into the step. Start using the way the posture sets some more dynamic footwork, and then linking we haven't looked at this exactly yet, but we've looked at dynamic stepping and we've looked at the way that postures are set, linking those two together, the dynamic footwork into a dynamic set, which is different than just setting a posture on the spot. If you're going to change and use dynamic footwork and set it, it's a whole different set of things that we need to think about. Not quite got like that point yet. And changing, and basically now we're just starting, if we just change the circles this way, and change we're just going back into all the traditional kinds of Yiquan practice that we're used to, and that's all trained in the same way. Just trained into the lock point, and then bring it into power, bring it into working on a bag, bring it into push hands, bring it into sparring, polish your uncle. So a couple of other things that we want then, just going back to, let's say we're going to do this way, changing. So I started looking at this idea, using the somatic bounce then to change from the spiral into straight movement. So spiral this way and then spiral, the energy goes that way, and then we change. Use the somatic bounce. You can see as it goes, see like just for a split second, it's like the hand is weightless before it goes back into the punch. Like that. Punch. Like that. Goes weightless for a split second. That's the somatic bounce in the arm. We'll go out in a minute. We'll do that one first for the cross. So start it. It's getting the 1-2 is the. It's easy to go 1-2 like that in our chain far lead, but to get it to bounce properly to the next like that is harder. So. So different parts of the phase and setting from different. So you can't really hear the front foot when it sets on the front foot so much. There's not as much weight on it, but I set it from the front foot and sort of skewed over to the left. So I skewed it over to the right for the. You can't see because the posture finish is skewed to the left, so I skewed over to the right that time for that and changed into the. And you can even start like, if you want to do it over to the right, because the front foot set is weaker, changing into the pivot route rather than the fishtail route for the set. It's absolutely fine like that. And one of the things you can do from that then is like, it brings you back into your complementary routine, so you can change back into the drop down into the cross like that. So here, pushing back off the front foot pivot route and back into the cross. That is much more advanced, I have to say. That's defo in the advanced category of routing and posture stacking in dynamic interconnection in a combination. So, because for a split second you're on the pivot route and then you use the quad to maximise the sympathy and stored force into the cross like that. But for basic you can just do it with a fishtail route, whichever feels right for you. And if we go the other way, this way like so a little bit more. The sympathy for the posture is harder because once we've released force that way, we've only got like half-assed stored force left to go that way. Like if we're all the way here, if we're all the way back like that, like we did before, look how much stored force we've got to go straight back into the punch. We've got all this space to, and all this complementary route. If I go that way, all the energy is already going that way. Even if my body's leaning back, my arms are already that way. So I've got to use more articulated force into the cross, like to lift it up like a little half circle like that, to get the power into it. Like it concertinas back in and then pushes out. Again, that is advanced posture setting. You don't see what I'm saying here. If I release force that way, all the energy is going that way very forcefully, and I want to now change to punch forwards, but my arms are already forwards, so I've only got this amount of movement, which is not the same as what I had before, where I was right back here to get the power in. I've got half the power, but I can compensate for that by using more articulated movement from my shoulder, by just concertinaing it in, this short power movement that we use. We've looked at it mostly going round like that, but this time we go and pull it back into the punch. Like that. Don't have to do it like that, of course. Yeah, we don't have to do it like that. Depends what we want to maximise. That's maximising power. So if I'm going like that, maximising power by getting that extra articulation. If I want to maximise speed, I just use hip and flow straight in like that. So, like that. But you can see that the power on both postures drops dramatically straight away because it becomes distributed between the two postures. And I've looked at why that happens. It's completely scientific, but I've looked at why that happens in multiple other videos, that you have to make that compromise like that. It might be the right, you might want to go for the eye gouge or something like that, in which case power isn't so much of an issue. You can just go straight into that. So these are all things to think about, but what we need most of all is obviously stuff that people can basically practice. And I've covered everything there from absolute beginners pretty much, and including the stuff on the intentional movement channel. Covers everything from absolute beginner right through to some pretty advanced concepts in terms of how you would use these postures. But for our basic movement, we just want to start thinking about how we rotate both ways, with this way, and changing it with footwork. And being able to do it both ways, not just both ways, but changing both ways intuitively. Sometimes you've got to use a little figure of eight to, and then change it, or the hands on different. All we're training is our ability to do this stuff intuitively in any possible necessary configuration. And we don't need to train every possible necessary configuration. We only need to do a certain set of basic exercises before that kicks in. Changing, and we need to start just moving into little lock points. So even with the lock point, now it's a much more dynamic lock point, so we're very used to the idea of a lock point, just hitting and stopping like that. Now with the hit and stop, there's a little thing on, there's still a little thing on the end, a little rotation like that. So even our hit and stop now goes into a more advanced category. And this is entirely because we've moved into using circular movements that are more advanced than straight movements. It's as simple as that. There's loads of little, and this little thing on the end is very much like the kind of mantis little, it feels like that, just like a little mantis-y. So it's just like little, so don't worry if it doesn't just stop dead like that. I mean, you can practice like that by all means, and you do that for the hit and flow. So stop dead and then, so there's a little thing like stops dead and then a little push. And we're just training the body movement. Like, so part of the concept here is you don't have to do this like full power all the time. Full power is like 10% of your practice. You don't wear the body out, you train really, really healthily. This stuff, it doesn't wear your body out at all, you can just do it for all your life. Like, there's nothing to it. But it's such fine-grained attention to detail that it builds into the full power movements. So, practicing our movements, practicing to the lock point with a little mantis-y curl on the end, practicing up to the lock point and then dead stop for our hit and flow. And all this is feeding into everything else we do as well. It's all training the body's cultivation to a higher level, feeds into everything else. Then we start thinking about doing them with power and just practicing on which way am I going to go, which way am I in the phase, and then different ways. I should say, of course, we don't only have to do it left and right, we've just limited it to this. If only it was that simple, we've limited it to this. For today, we can do forward into a little articulated wave, like from this way, and we can do all kinds of split and things, and all the things that you see in push hands and changing like that. There's hundreds and hundreds of different ways of variations of doing it. Variations on this. So access the infinite curriculum if you like, just start thinking about them. As long as it conforms to the principles, you can work out a lot. We'll look at some, but Not now. For now, we just want this left and right, and we start bringing the power in, and then punches that go along. So we're just getting it with our more lively footwork and movement, freer movement. And just, it doesn't, you don't always have to do it like full. You don't always have to do the full thing. You can just do it like nice and light and vary. And where's the spiral? So that's a good example. Like where's the spiral into the hook, for example. Like one. That's a very good example of Gao Chen like big articulated setup. Move the arms and then another spiral. 1, 2 into the punch. You see the big spiral movement into the punch. And we can practice it like that, no problem. Going round and like that, spiraling it around. But maybe we want we don't want to spiral, release force and spiral back and hit again. Maybe we just want to hit and flow, so go straight into like that. But you definitely lose force, you lose that extra articulation on the movement. You can try and compensate for it by shifting the movement more into the shoulder. But the movement itself is too fast to allow that time to kick in. So these are all the compromises that we have to make through different ways that we use the postures. Okay, I understand. So that begins to introduce how we use circular movement. There's lots and lots of variations. We can change from here. We can do it like this way, we can do it like this. It's exactly the same, but start with the basic exercises, bring them up to the lock point. Don't worry too much about which way the posture is setting. Let the intent worry about that. All you need to do is think about, start at a certain point in the phase of the movement, and then think about your problematic, like I want to release force that way. Just let your intent decide how it's going to stack the posture and set it. I'm here, but now I want to release force that way. You know, from this point in the phase, I want to release force left, how do I do it? I want to release force right, how do I do it? Which way does it favour? There's multiple different ways of doing it. You can even very often just set on the same foot. Depending, it might fishtail out or it might fishtail in. Sometimes it's more powerful to do it on the left. You'll find little moments where the intent makes the wrong decision because you can feel yourself. It's stronger if you do it a different way. If you set it on the front foot or the back foot, for example, and you might want to train yourself more to do it one way or the other, but for the most part, just enjoy solving the problems. This is the process. Let the intent take over solving these problems. And if you're more advanced, just start thinking about how you might change the route. And instead of setting with the flat-footed route, setting with, so you might be changing into a pivot route to work with just the spiral force. Haven't got enough time to look at that today, so I'll have to bring that into a more advanced video somewhere down the line where we'll integrate it with something else, but just flag that up now for advanced practitioners and dogs that want to go on a walk. I think that's enough. I think that's enough to work on. It is getting more complicated, it's getting harder, I recognise that. There's no easy path. There's nothing, once you let go of that BS, that magic BS and fantasy stuff and thinking like just standing's going to give you magic powers or even just like real powers, there's no easy way. And a lot of people, I have to say, even people who get quite good physical movement, articulation, can't transfer it into they stop at that point. Clarity is their enemy. They think, I've got it. I've got articulated movements. No, but can you do all these different variations of release force and setting the posture and stacking it and skewing the stack and hitting and bringing it into combinations? Can you do it with power on a bag? Can you start making it work, not just in push hands, but in sparring and sparring against all, I know I haven't got all my past videoed, but I have sparred and trained and wrestled with people from every level, right up to elite level, across a range of fight sports. So testing it out, just getting out there and seeing, honing it, letting it become embodied knowledge that links together. I recognise you're going on a waffle stance. So that's it. Hey, one love. Leave a message if you find anything's helpful. Spread the word if you think anyone will be interested. Don't really get that many views, but that doesn't matter. I'm really grateful for everyone who is interested. Thank you. See you in the next one.